Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Grow Support. My name is Neil, and today I'm joined by Daniel Hoffkins to talk about scaling support and getting started from zero and what that actually looks like when it comes to actually starting with building a support organization. It's one of my favorite topics, and I'm super excited to have you come and talk with us, Daniel. Can you introduce yourself and where you're coming from?
Yeah, thanks so much, Neil. Awesome to be here. So yeah, my name's Dan. Originally, I'm from Connecticut, still here. I live in Reading, which is a beautiful, beautiful place. I actually currently am the head of operations and business development at Certainly CX. I've been with them for about 8-9 months now, which is crazy to say. It's totally flown by. Prior to that, I've worked primarily in the healthcare space and health tech space, standing up teams in support from 0 to 1, going from 1 to 2. I've been in that space for about 10 years now, going on 10 years, which is pretty crazy. Prior to that, I was mostly in the financial technology space, again, doing support, customer engineering, quality assurance, things like that. But really found a passion for support when working in QA and doing on-site technical visits and things like that, which really wanted me to take it full time. And I've always been curious about the health tech and healthcare space. So yeah, launched into that about 10 years ago and have been doing it ever since. And really got the bug for building teams from zero, going from 0 to 1. It's just really, there's a lot to do. You're always busy. It's always like you're solving this constantly evolving and changing puzzle. And yeah, been kind of bitten by that bug and have stayed with it ever since. So that's a little bit about me. And yeah, thanks again for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I love that you put that it's a always ever evolving puzzle to build and change.
Never a dull day.
That's definitely true. I'm curious, you mentioned, you go from, you've been building teams from 0 to 1 and getting that step started in that sense. What does it mean to start from 0 in support?
Yeah, it's a great question. So thinking for me about the foundations, it's always about the customer experience, the customer journey. Like, what's the problems that we're trying to solve for the customer? What are they currently focusing on? What are they currently experiencing? And what do we want that outcome to be? That could be, great satisfaction. It could be speed. You may be in a high volume environment. Maybe it's low volume. You might want to focus on, different aspects. But really, it starts with, the customer journey. What does that definition look like? And if you don't have one, we probably should sit down and define one, right? Like, what does that look like to go through the entire customer experience and the customer journey? But really starting with that, and what do we want those outcomes to be? And then focusing on things like, what problems are we trying to solve? Do we have a common request or complaint that comes in through support? How are we addressing those today? Are we actually tagging and tracking that data? Or is it just kind of handling everything on the fly? The inbox is filling up. We're figuring out as we go. How do we sort of tag and track those things and start to put some structure around it with the goal of solving those problems and enhancing the customer experience? So for me, it really starts out with that experience, that journey, and solving towards that. And then what tools, systems, people might we need along the way to help solve for it and also accelerate it.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, working really towards the outcome-oriented version of building it rather than just, hey, we need this, and already kind of have your preset stack ready to go. It's not always plug and play in that sense, depending on your needs.
Exactly. And you might be trying to solve, goals and, different problems every day. Maybe not goals, but you might be trying to solve different problems every day. But what is the goal and the outcome that you're trying to get to? And then how is that structure of your journey, your team, your tooling, your processes, how does that solve that at the end of the day? So thinking about the journey, the outcomes, and how we get there is really where I like to start. And then everything else, we'll figure out, maybe not along the way, but we'll figure out as they go. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm really curious because you said you got bit by the bug to continue to build these things out and really focus on those kinds of teams and that kind of building. So say, for example, I am starting a startups are really, really large these days. So of course, obviously the technology boom and everything that's coming up in that sense. And really people are trying to build out a bit more of their support organizations as they start to scale up and grow. Yeah. So say I'm just getting started. I'm joining a new startup. They've said, hey, go help customers. we need somebody finally to do it. And you've been tasked with getting it off the ground. What's the first thing that you look at when you start that process?
Being sort of the operations guy, I love to look at the processes that are currently in place. Like, what are we currently doing today? So really look at the systems, processes, everything that we're doing, are we living in email? Do we have a full-blown help desk system? Do we have documentation? But most importantly, like, who are the people that are involved? Do we have a customer support team? How is that structured today? Are we doing a lot of cross collaboration between product, engineering, marketing, or is it kind of part-time, across, and everyone's kind of chipping in and doing a little bit of a support role here and there? So I'd love to kind of just start with, what are we currently doing today from an operations standpoint, but also from a people, a management, a structure standpoint as well. And really just kind of take it all in and look at, what are we currently doing? And again, going back to, once we've got kind of the lay of the land, we have an idea of like, oh, here are how things are working today. What do we need to do to get to that next, that next stage in order to satisfy the customer journey and the customer experience? Like, what's going to be the next maybe low lift, high impact thing that we could do? And that may take like, that may be immediate. I've stepped into environments where like, on the week one, right away, I'll give you an example. When I was at Semaphore, we had a relatively small customer support team. We had mainly support over emails, but we did have a phone line as well. It was one physical phone that was sitting on the desk, and it basically rang the voicemail every time. And the inbox was always full. And it's like, hey, are we calling them back? Like, what's happening with that? A pretty clear, offering that we need to fix right away was phone support. How are we going to make this scalable? How are we going to be able to meet that SLA and all those things? And so that was a little bit of a process, a team, and a technical solution. But that was like one of those day one, okay, we need to address that first. But it might be after a few weeks, it might be after a few months, depending on sort of the stage of your startup and what's in place. What do you need to focus on next? But I'd love to start with what we're doing today, from the operations, from the people piece, and then form a plan to go into the next phase for that high impact, but hopefully low lift, so we can get some quick wins, and then start building on that momentum towards the greater goal and the greater vision.
I'm curious, it sounds like you have a pretty set structure when you go into these processes of starting to build. So you get the lay of the land, you really start to understand the processes, the people, what your current status and situation is, get a pulse on it. Exactly. And then what you first mentioned as well is really start to understand the customer journey and what is the organization working towards, so that we can then support that in that sense. Is there any other common frameworks that you use that you would kind of really make sure as you go through this process that, hey, I'm looking at this, I'm looking at that, and what is kind of the next thing that you're looking at?
It's a great question. Thinking about, I always want to make sure we're aligned with the business needs and the business goals. And sometimes you do get a curveball that's thrown in there. So like making sure that, as you're setting those goals, maybe on a day-to-day basis, like what aligns with the team's needs, the business's needs, and is that something that's important that we need to work on right now? Or is that something that, hey, maybe we can defer that, or it's not as pressing of a topic? I kind of have, like you mentioned, I have my framework and my thoughts, but making sure I'm looking at it from a 360 point of view as well. So meeting with different stakeholders, product, engineering, marketing, whoever we may be tied into with, getting their sense of view, their perspective and their view as well, and trying to formulate as much of a 360 picture as I can. So I have my process, but maybe there's something else that's pressing and that's really high urgency that maybe I see it differently, or I don't quite understand, the levels of priority and how they vary for the team or how the company for the company yet. So looking at it and working with different stakeholders is also another thing I'll drop in there, and want to work with as many people as possible. I hope that answers your question, but.
Yeah. Start really getting those relationships built and start to understand, what are we actually working towards in that sense, so you can support the journey. Exactly. Curious, because you mentioned something as well, like you of course have your kind of framework and you can jump in and you have your ideas of the things that will work in that sense. And as support people who have grown these teams and grown these organizations, we could be like, oh yeah, you need this, you need that, you need this is the whole checklist, you got to get this set up. But it's also so easy to over process or like create more than is needed for the time and the stage that you're in.
Yeah.
What do you think are two of the biggest differences between starting from zero versus something that is already built, when you look at the difference between the scale and the size?
It's interesting because I think when you're starting from zero, you can be very lean and very dynamic. So it's very easy to jump to say, if we just had fill in the blank tool, if we had Zendesk for help desk, or if we had Salesforce for CRM, that's going to solve all your problems. But those are really just tools. And it's how you optimize and configure them. So I think when you have those things in place, it can be a bigger monster to wrangle, so to speak, because you may have integrations, different people in the system, you may have processes that are in place that need to be reworked. So it can be a lot of backwards engineering or re-engineering how things currently work, especially when you take the time to understand the customer journey and what we're trying to do. That may be a lot to unwind, and it can take a lot of time. Whereas if you're a little bit leaner, maybe you're just starting with Google Docs or just with an email inbox, you can define those processes and build up very leanly over time and do it, I would say, cheaper, in those types of systems, and work up to that. Whereas it can be more costly either from a dollars perspective or from a time and investment perspective to rework or to optimize some of the systems that are already in place. Especially when you have maybe silos that have developed over time where certain teams have gone with one tech stack and other teams have gone with another. Now you're trying to make them all work together. Very common problem. It can definitely take time. You have to understand how all those things work. But when I kind of like the startup environment, because you can really do it leanly, figure it all out, and then work up to those things and figure out what the right tooling and stack is, and hopefully get everybody on the same page earlier, and then kind of get that buy-in, and then it becomes much easier to scale and maintain over time.
I think that's great. I think, like, for example, if you just go for this, you mentioned like this huge Zendesk, the whole Salesforce, everything. If you're just starting out, you're also going to lock yourself into that kind of tech and position for a very long time, rather than staying flexible as the situation evolves and you keep things going on down the road. What you mentioned about the different systems and silos not meshing very well, we always call that the spaghetti monster because there's so many things that are just intertwined and creating so many different workflows that creates debt over time, both tech-wise and dollar-wise, in that sense. So I agree. I think definitely some of the biggest differences is at Zero, you're really focused on keeping it light, keeping it flexible, and really just understanding those early customer needs. Whereas One, then you start thinking of process and structure and this kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And especially with systems like Salesforce that are extremely robust and flexible, but take time, take energy, sometimes dedicated engineers and administrators. There's a lot that goes into it. It's a beast. And like you mentioned, they can have tentacles into a lot of different things. I find it a lot more flexible and nimble and adaptable, so that if you're going to, as you're going through that journey and you're doing it very lean, if you make a mistake, so to speak, or if you change direction or focus, because that never happens, right? We never get thrown those curveballs where all of a sudden one quarter it's here's our goal, and then the next it's shifted. You can adapt very quickly and work with that and make those changes more cheaply on paper, or adapt a system very, very quickly and be very nimble and scrappy about it. And then as things solidify, build that up. Whereas with something like a larger system that maybe has a lot of development time or complex solutions, that can be much more intrinsic to work with and make work in a lot more time. So I rambled there a little bit at the end, but hopefully that
No, you're good. I love it because the thing is, I use this analogy a lot, actually. You don't need a supercar to drive to the grocery store. You just need something to get you there, right? Like it's about using the right kind of tools and the right setup that you need for the space that you're in. Even if you, for example, have been there and have done that, and you know what the kind of end state looks like when it comes to really great scaled service. If you're going into a small environment, you know that you also don't need those things just yet. There's a timing to those certain things. So, for example, in that same scenario, you're a founder, you come in with founders, you're working that startup, you get set, hey, go start support, go build it out, go see where you're at. What do you think are the first kind of key or core components to start looking at? You mentioned, get a state for the processes, get a state for, the workflows and the operations and the people things. But from a functional standpoint, like in support, is there a checklist that you have of like, okay, we need documentation, we need a quality process, we need this kind of thing, we need self-service? Like, is there this kind of checklist that you use and go down the line?
I would say it depends on, I'm certainly, a big proponent of documentation, looking at metrics, tagging tickets, looking at priorities and urgencies and things like that. I wouldn't say there's a steadfast set list. I would keep it relatively flexible, but I would say there are definitely some top ones, like, the self-service aspects and documentation. Do we have FAQs? Do we have, hopefully a help center, maybe with all that documentation. But if not, maybe just a Google Doc with, hey, here are the common things that typically come in our tickets or on our phone calls. Are we using those in any sort of regular, consistent fashion, or are people kind of winging it with every email ticket or phone call that comes in? So certainly that documentation, even if it's rudimentary, I always look at that, very urgently. So I would say that's close to the top of the list. Maybe there's other things that might, supersede it. Like we have some technical issues or things like that single phone that just sat on the desk and rang constantly. Like I would probably put that above the documentation, but, love looking at that as, closer to the top of the list. Are we implementing it consistently for the things that are in there? Working towards that quality standard and that consistency across the team. So we're not giving out, dishonest or misinformation, anything like that. But also, metrics. Are we tracking anything in terms of, volume, customer satisfaction, response rates, top issues that are coming in? At any given time, I'd love to work to the point of having that data available. So if my boss comes to me or whatever, how many tickets did we handle yesterday? How fast? And what was the top issue? I'd love to work towards that tagging and that reporting system, which can be kind of a spaghetti monster in itself sometimes. But working towards quality reporting with the data, and certainly that starts with the tagging and understanding it. Having good quality data of your tickets, of your phone calls, of your emails is super important as well. So I would say some of the top things, certainly that documentation, the QA and consistency of our responses, our metrics and reporting are 3 super important ones I look at as well. On top of process, right? Are we doing that consistently? Do we have clear paths for escalation? So if something comes into support, are we just kind of throwing it over the fence and saying, oh, okay, product's got it? Or is there that level of follow through as well? So that is super important. I think that probably plugs into the quality piece, but those I would say are my top ones that I love to look at. Maybe not in that order, but very important.
Yeah, I've always lived by this framework of we want to have really, really good conversations with customers. We want to have those really quality interactions. In order to have those really quality interactions, we need to have good knowledge, whether that's internally or for our customers to have them. We need to have information available and ready to support them and have a good quality interaction.
Yeah.
From those good quality interactions, we want to make sure that we have the data capability to be able to understand why we're having those conversations or what we can get out of those conversations, so that we can then turn them into better knowledge and continue this cycle of growth. And what you mentioned is at least get those foundational metrics. What's the volume like that's coming in? What are people talking about so that we can roll that up to product? I think especially, for example, in early stage startups and these kinds of really close teams, really that product and that customer feedback is really, really, really high velocity in terms of, hey, we have these few customers, they're here, get them the product, and product will already implement it. And this feedback loop is super fast when it comes to the importance that it has within the organization as well. So at least having the capability to measure those types of things also helps you to prioritize them as well.
Absolutely. And I think you hit on it with the feedback loops and being able to, because support is really that, such a valuable resource for a number of reasons, but having those feedback loops and being able to bring that to product, to engineering, wherever they may need to be routed, or even internally, getting that to the right folks to make sure that we're giving good quality responses and learning from those interactions so that we can improve ourselves, but also we can, improve the product, and being able to track what those things are and being able to bring, quality. Like I'm sure a lot of folks, we get a lot of different, tickets, complaints, whatever you want to call them. What are the most important ones? How do we gauge that urgency? And that requires, good feedback loops, quality partnerships with your stakeholders, and knowing when to bring things to, hopefully regular meetings or get them into the system so we can assign points to them or elevate them, in our sprints, whatever it may be. Having that is super important to not only building, trust and a great relationship between internal teams, support, product, but also with our customers and enhancing the customer journey as well.
Yeah, I think that's where the gold mine, as they say, in support is really that customer voice in that sense, and really being able to keep the business close to what customers are saying in a measurable fashion as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have mentioned some amazing advice in terms of the structure and being able to really go through the process in the state of getting started very practically at what to look at and how to start. If you could give a piece of advice to somebody who's just starting out on that journey, or even you 10 years ago, what would you give them as advice to get started with it?
Oh, if only we had the DeLorean, right? The time machine. No, it's a great question because, so many mistakes. Hopefully learn from most, but I would say one that definitely floats to the top is, if you don't hesitate to start tagging and tracking data early. Like if you think it's too early, it's probably not. Having good quality data helps you do so many good things. So, I've been in instances where, we've just been in inboxes and, just adding labels to things. And we had to get creative with, extracting some of the data from it. Certainly having it in structured, systems, or being able to put it into a better structure so you can manipulate and do more with it is great. But even just getting started, don't be shy of tagging, tracking, assigning urgencies, and putting some of the structure around that, because that data will help drive the next steps in your processes. Whether that's, do we invest in a tool to be able to do this more efficiently? Do we need to escalate something to our product or engineering teams, whether that is an urgent issue or a product feature request? Or if we're looking at volumes and satisfaction, depending on our goals, when do we know to hire more people? When do we know to think about automation? That all kind of comes back to that core data set that you're working with. So if I could go back and tap younger me on the shoulder and say, hey, you should really do this. It's never too early to start tagging, tracking, looking at those metrics, because that's going to be the basis for a lot of the processes that you're going to build on. So definitely don't be shy about doing that early.
Oh man, we went from 5,000 to 9,000 customers in Gmail as our support tool.
Oh gosh.
You should see the tagging system that we set up with labels and filters. It's crazy.
I can imagine the colors, the tags, just everywhere.
Labels, everything is crazy. And just setting up at least some tags or some way to organize yourself is huge. It does wonders, especially if you don't have a full ticketing system that has those capabilities. I think it was really, really great advice. Don't be shy about at least tagging something or finding some way to keep track of what's actually happening in that sense.
One of my sort of issues that I'm constantly working through is getting to version 1, because I can see version 10 down the line, I know what this can be. And sometimes that can be a barrier to entry or barrier to getting started. Even if it's a tagging system, and 5,000, 6,000 emails and inboxes is wild. But even if you just start very simply, like identifying your top 5 issues, and you have 5 labels, cool, let's start there, and then we can build on it. A common thing I always do is I see version 10 and I want to build right towards that. Start with baby steps and build on top of that. Very quickly you'll go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 up to 10, and then beyond that. And that helps inform so many of the next processes. But don't overbuild, don't overcomplicate too soon, because very quickly it will grow into that spaghetti monster we were talking about. So definitely get started sooner, start small, and then build on top of that, even if it's something super rudimentary.
Oh yeah, we had a whole big conversation about how to build your first taxonomy with Nick a long time ago, and he said spoke a lot about this overgrowth of your tagging system, and really just starting simple and letting it starting to branch out and grow as you grow. You don't need to start with this huge locked in scientific structure of everything, and having room for flexibility in the future is a big important part of that. I love that you mentioned you can see 10, you can see what it can be and the potential there, and we've geared the conversation a little bit towards people who might not have built support yet and are just starting to do this for the first time and kind of looking for it. But I think it's a really good call out as well for thinking about how or what somebody who has done it and built it and is now changing maybe gears from that larger organization towards starting it somewhere fresh where it is that level 0 and kind of going back in levels. What is the difference in mindset that you would kind of think about as you make that kind of a transition?
It's interesting because, like myself, I was in fintech space for years. Larger corporations. We moved very very slow compared to the startup space. So things might take months, if not quarters, to kind of go from a simple concept to maybe even just discussing it or signing resources, getting started. So it was a very slower process. Doing it in younger companies or startups is definitely where my space is, and I've had to kind of pull my brain back from that version 10 to that. So if you're just getting started in that, like, I guess taking a breath, because it can be overwhelming at times. You may step into something and see all the problems or perceived problems, not knowing where to get started. What is sort of step one? How do I begin? Take a breath, do your best not to get overwhelmed. Ask for help. Like, don't be afraid to put your hand up and say, hey, I'm thinking to do this, but I would love your feedback on this. Some of the mistakes I've made have been just diving right into it and going headlong into a problem, which is a great way to learn, but very quickly you can get overwhelmed. So especially in the younger startup space or younger companies with all these things happening, take it slow as much as you can. Take a breath and try your best not to get overwhelmed. Understand what you need to tackle first. Tie that back to the customer journey, tie that back to the customer experience, and take it step at a time. There's no step, I think, too small, especially if it leads to the next one. But yeah, that was something I had to like re-gear my brain around, going from larger corporations that moved like a monolith and so slow. And then now we're very nimble. We have more freedom, more flexibility to make decisions and go. That can be great, but it can also really get you wrapped around the axle very quickly too. So taking a breath, conferring with other folks, talking to stakeholders, whether they're in your group or across the company, helps keep that grounded and realign or align your priorities and goals. And just take baby steps, and pretty soon you'll go from one small step and stack them on top of each other. Next thing you know, you'll have your version 1, and then look at, okay, what does version 2 look like? What is the problem that we're trying to solve? How can we make this more efficient? How can we make this better? Is the goal shifted? Does this meet our our goals and priorities? And just take it step at a time. Next thing you know, you'll have version 3, and so on. So that was the process that kind of got me through some pivotal and changing times. But that's some advice I would give to folks that are tackling that for the first time.
Nice. And I think it's really important, something that we haven't quite touched on yet. When you're in this building process, and I love that you're calling it versions, of going from version 1 to version 2 to version 3, for example, and kind of moving through these phases and steps, you will probably build, break, reshuffle, change all the processes that you built a year ago. Like, I just actually spoke with one of my team leads yesterday, like, hey, actually, you know what? I think our SLA tagging system is now out of date. We have to completely change it, and we should probably do it in a better way. We built it version 1, and it worked, and worked for a long time, but now things are changed, and now that wonderful thing I spent so much time building is now time to get rid of it. And I think being comfortable with, don't lock yourself into a process just because you built it. It's version 1. In version 2, it could look completely different to serve different needs. And being comfortable with ripping out old processes that you recently built, it's an important one.
Oh, it can be emotional sometimes, because like you mentioned, spent so much time, and and it's a learning process, and it's going to evolve and change. And I think tags is a great example. It's a common issue. I'm sure you've seen, like, you may start out with 5 tags, and next thing you know, you have 500, and each one of those means something to you, or it means something to the team. We can't get rid of that, but really thinking about, hey, is this as efficient as possible? Is it fulfilling the needs of the team and the needs of the business? Is this actually helping us, or is this hindering because we have 10 of the same tag just under different words? Have not run into that at all. And I think it's really important, like you said, to kind of think about what the next evolution might look like. Some of the one of the phrases I hate, I shouldn't say hate, but I hear all the time, but I'm like, oh, that's the way we've always done it. Like, don't get too married to a certain process. And I know it can happen. It can be emotional. There might be other folks invested in it too. But that's where I think, especially if other teams are involved, like building that cross-departmental collaboration and trust is super important, because when it comes time to make that next step and that next evolution, like, it's for the right reasons. So yeah, definitely don't be too married to that, to a certain process or to a certain tool. Be thinking about what that next step looks like, and be willing to take, the steps and the jump that you need to get there.
Yeah, I think that's really important to just take that as objectively as possible, as well. And yeah, I mean, you're building something. When you make something, it's a craft, right? You're working on it, so it's very easy to get invested, because you've seen it come to life. It's an organism now, right? In that sense. I really appreciate all of the advice and everything that you've been able to give walking through your journey. A half an hour goes by so fast, it seems, when you have these kinds of conversations. You could talk about it all day. I do have one last question for you. Over the course of your career, whether it be just building support or working in other industries and anything, doesn't necessarily need to be support. Is there one thing that you learned along the way that you really still stick to today?
That's a great question. I would say just the ability to be flexible and adaptable. I think when you get, I don't want to say set in your ways, but if you become kind of like we were just talking about, if you stay kind of locked in or too stiff or too rigid in a certain path, or whatever it may be, it's a quick way to get left behind. So staying flexible, staying adaptable, whether that's with your processes, tools, programming languages. I think AI is a great example of that, where it's not coming, it's here. It's really how we're going to implement it. There's a lot of different use cases. Pretty much, if you look out, not just now, but into the very near future, I don't think there's going to be almost anything that doesn't have AI or a flavor of it baked into it, application, product, whatever it might be. So that's a great example of being flexible, being adaptable where you can. And looking back, there are certainly points in my career where I didn't have that mindset. It was sort of like, no, why? This is the way we've always done it. But I think when you can kind of move past that mindset a little bit and think about, like, hey, how can we implement these new types of tools? How can this help? And just being open-minded and flexible is something I definitely learned earlier on, and I've carried that with me and will continue to as well. So it's a great question. But
no, I love it. I think, yeah, especially with how quickly things change these days, it's one of the most important things to stay mindful of, is being able to change.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, like I said, in this environment, it's 2020. It's basically 2026. So yeah, things are moving so quickly. Being able to move and shift and be as adaptable and open-minded as you can, I think it's simple, but it's not easy.
I love the way you put that. Awesome. Well, Dan, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts and your experience, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Neil. This has been great. Really appreciate the time and awesome questions.
Thanks. If people do want to continue the conversation with you and they want to reach out to you, what would be the best place for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, shoot me an email. Very super and original, daniel.hoffkins@gmail.com. Feel free to, it's my personal email. Feel free to hit me up. Would love to talk to different folks about, what you're seeing, questions you might have. Would also love to continue the conversation. Hopefully it wasn't too rambly or too boring, but, if it was, reach out and let me know that too. But would absolutely love to connect with folks. And again, really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Dan.